Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Texas AEL Manager Mondays. Our title for today, our presentation is With Great Funding Comes Great Responsibility. And our presenter today is Tiffany Johnson, and she's the director at Victoria College AEL. And today's April 15th, and my name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm going to be your host and moderator. So welcome, and let's welcome our presenter. Our presenter today is, again, Tiffany Johnson. She's the Director of Adult Education at Victoria College, and she's been the director since 2013. She's been in the field of adult education for 20 years. I think she started when she was a teenager. And she is the TWC AEL board. She was the TWC AEL presiding officer, and she currently left that position. She was graciously allowed someone else to take that lead. And then she is a board member with Workforce Solutions of Golden Crescent. She's also our TALI president. That's our adult education state organization. And she has a Bachelor of Art in History, Spanish, and a Master of Interdisciplinary Studies. So welcome, Tiffany. And so if anyone has any questions, we'd like you to ask them at this time. Otherwise, I'm going to transfer the presentation and the rights to Tiffany Johnson. So welcome, everybody. Tiffany, take it away.
Great. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me now? Make sure I'm not muted.
Yes.
Okay, so good almost afternoon. Yes, it is afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to Dr. Escamilla and Train PD for having me deliver this Manager Monday. I'm very happy to see so many of you have chosen to spend your lunch hour with me to discuss and talk a little bit about what oftentimes I consider kind of the number one challenge of being an adult education director. So we're going to go through and have some good discussion. I'm going to share a lot of information with you, but more than anything, I'd like for this to be an initial conversation. Definitely, I cannot answer everything in an hour for you, but I'll do my best. So the discussion topics I'd like to bring up today basically have to do with why do we need to be fiscally responsible, what type of setup you may have. I think a lot of us are either in community colleges, ISDs, region service centers. Everyone may have a little different structure. Some of you are a part of consortia. Some of you are sole providers. So we'll just kind of throw that out and start the discussion of what type of setup we do have, what type of funds you may have, what type of planning do you do or should you be doing. Maybe we can bring up a few things about some tricky areas, some tools that we can use and share amongst each other. And then lastly, I want to make sure that we do have some time to talk about some questions. And if we don't have the answers today, we certainly can get those taken care of and maybe have a follow-up. So, as many of you know, me in the state, I'm what I like to call a legacy leader. That means that I've been in adult education for over 20 years, as Dr. Escamilla said, but I started as a part-time teacher. I went on to become a career navigator, actually before that's the title, and we kind of called each other advisors. I was a distance learning coordinator for a while. I was a county jail instructor for many years. If anyone knows, they've heard about, hey, that's the lady that was in the jail. That would be me. I do have some degrees. I do have some credentials, but essentially nowhere in my entire life have I ever been trained to be fiscally responsible. And actually, for the last 5 years, while serving as a director, each year on my annual evaluation and my goal-setting plan, I've answered the question of how my supervisor can help me with the same response. I don't have a clue what I'm doing. Can someone please help me with our finances? Every year, my supervisor, who has great intentions, tried to help, tried to match me with someone on campus, tried to give me some support. But again, when you look at adult education and the funding, it's definitely no ordinary beast to tame. So we not only figured that out here, but I think a lot of you share maybe the similar frustrations in your programs. So that, my friends, is my disclaimer today. I'm going to attempt to share some of the knowledge that I have picked up, and I'm definitely not going to attempt to tell you what you should be doing. So why am I talking about this program? So I figured if Nolan Ryan, the baseball player, can sell beef, and William Shatner can talk about hotels, and Gal Gadot can sell makeup, I think I can discuss a few things about finances. So that's my official disclaimer, and we're going to talk about and tackle why we need to be fiscally responsible. Because let's address the big question here. The biggest concern is good intentions in our hearts, because number one, we don't want to go to prison. We know that we're not doing anything illegal. We know that we're not doing anything to get our fiscal agent in trouble or our funding agency in trouble. But especially that's not enough to keep us always out of trouble. So the disclaimer of misuse of grant funds just sounds like an especially harsh and disgusting phrase that really I've always felt like could address my ignorance. The second reason I want to make sure that I take this next step in fiscal responsibility is that I have a small staff. We are one of the smallest workforce board development areas, and we are a sole provider in our area. But I have a staff of 9 full-time and 28 part-time employees, and they all trust and feel confident that they're going to have a job and they're going to be given a paycheck. Some of them rely on me and my leadership skills to pay their bills and keep them fed. So I do take that responsibility seriously enough to ensure that I'm going to do everything I can do and do the best job I can. And lastly, the final reason that I wanted to kind of share with you is that I don't ever want to tell students that I'm out of funds and I can't support them. I don't want to have to tell adult education students who walk through our doors, go through our testing processes, and take a real leap into the world of education for the first time, that we're not able to support them all the way through, or we have to cut back classes, or we can't provide services, mainly because of the limited funding that I can project and I can support them with. So I really want to make sure that I do the best I can to be responsible and to be able to step forward and share that information and share everything with you guys that I've learned over the years to make those dollars stretch. So let's talk a little bit about the different structures in your organization. Some of you may need to be the business manager and handle everything from payroll, accounts payable, procurements, file your own CEDAR reports. Some of you may make your own journal entries into your accounting system, do your own reallocations, and some of you may have a setup similar to mine where you work closely with the business office and just need to ensure your costs are reasonable, they're allowed, and make sure that you're able to use your grant dollars to work with monitoring your funds to not overspend or underspend. So everyone has a different type of setup. Some of you, again, may be subrecipients in a consortia. So you need to look at your institution and figure out, or at least be aware that there's a lot of different types of arrangements from institution to institution. And maybe your situation and your program isn't exactly the best fit. Maybe you are able to designate some of your personnel on your staff to either help manage specific funding, or maybe even figure out a way that you can have some of that support across your institution or your fiscal agency. I know that when we first started, we had a newer accountant or director of finance is her title. And with me being a new director, she assumed that I had more background with some of the details than I did. So we had to work together and try to develop a system of checks and balances between our two offices and make sure that we had designated staff in place who could be able to double check what we're doing and make sure that we were able to adjust some of our jobs and some of our responsibilities, just to make sure that the best person for the job was conducting the job. So let's go on and talk about specific costs and talk a little bit about what categories should be designated with your funds. So this chart is just highlighting some of the top ones. Obviously, there's a lot more detail that you can get into and different areas that you can designate. If you're like me, most of your funds every year will go to payroll. So some of you may have been fortunate enough to have some of your institution or your fiscal agent pitch in some funds to help offset your salary, or maybe even provide an administrative support. We definitely like to use our student workers as well, so we don't need to allocate in our grant funding or in our funds to be able to pay them. We have been in a situation before where we paid rent on our facility and needed to have prior approval under TEA for those costs. If you're in that situation now, you may make sure that you're working with the Workforce Commission or your consortium lead to be able to determine what costs are, and there are some that need that special approval. Indirect and infrastructure costs are determined by your fiscal agent and negotiated. Those are going to come from your admin funds, and ours are taken out monthly by our institution. Those indirect funds can be used to cover things such as our human resources office, the business office, any leadership support that comes from our institution. They can be pretty costly, so you definitely want to look at whether you have a set, determined, negotiated rate across the year from your fiscal agent or before your contract ever starts. And that way you can go ahead and allocate those and take them out of your spending money or your true costs. And then travel, supplies, and marketing are your other dollars to actually determine what you can and cannot use throughout the program. Hopefully you'll have some left to cover these. I know that the budgets get very tight, and so being able to allocate and designate a certain amount for things, we're going to look at a few more little examples as to whether to place specific costs, and you'll see more or less what we're looking at. And I'll show you a few spreadsheets that I use to help us predict and break these down a little bit more. So, funding streams. These are the different types of funds that you have coming in. These are the most common. Obviously, not everyone will have the same. But the different types of funding sources that you may get, you may have additional ones. We have local dollars that we have coming from our local foundation. We have a couple of small agency funds that we have access to use in addition to our Workforce Commission allocations. It's definitely a very good practice to establish different funding accounts with your fiscal agent. I talked to a couple of directors who said that their costs or their accounts are all together and it's impossible to separate. At one time, we did not have separate admin and program funds in our institution, and it got real messy and real sticky. So you can ask your business office, or if that's your job, to go ahead and make sure that'll keep things nice and clean and be able to match up your costs and be able to designate those very specifically with your funding streams. So you don't want to commingle and you don't want to muddle up any of your funds, so keeping them clean and keeping them allocated properly. You definitely could and should blend your funds when purchasing any items or paying payroll costs. You want to make sure there's a clear account record, though, of each of your sources, and that'll also assist you with explaining what the cost was and ensuring that each specific charge and why the reason was that you selected that account to use those funds. Remember that the admin and the program costs have very clear rules on them about when and how each of them can be used. And so you'll notice on my chart the difference between admin and program for federal, state, TANF, and EL Civics. I know some of your programs do not absolutely designate a portion for corrections. This is something that we chose to do internally. Some of your Fed dollars can be designated. I know statewide there's a special amount of percentage that they'd like to designate. We do keep it separate because we do have some nice clean costs that are specifically for corrections with the prisons and the county jails that we serve in our area. Your training costs, this is very clear this year. It's a whole separate reporting system through TWC to keep those separate. We did not separate those out last year, and again, keeping a different fund so that you can keep your training costs completely clean and designated was very effective. So also be very cognizant of what percentage of state funds you have, and try to ensure that you always have the justifiable rationale of why you used state funds versus federal funds. Obviously, if you have a very clean cost, as I mentioned in the corrections class, it's held in a correctional facility, 100% of the salary and the supplies are going to be able to be used in that location with those dollars. It's a very clean cost. So those are nice and simple. It's a little stickier when you're looking at the difference between the federal and the state numbers and when you can use which costs. Obviously, the big hang-up is TANF. We know TANF documentation is critical. You definitely do not want to code anyone with TANF funding unless you make positively sure that you've got that TANF documentation in hand. It's very dangerous to buy anything, especially if you're looking at something like supplies, maybe a computer, paper, all with 100% TANF funding, unless you have a designated site and you can ensure that only TANF students are using those resources. So again, think about your overall percentage of students in your program and have a methodology for justifying why you used certain costs with certain purchases. And I'll show you a few of the documents that we use internally to help us track and make sure that we're giving a true effort to each of the different funding streams. So planning and monitoring. This is probably the biggest obstacle that we have to face, is figuring out how to plan ahead of time, how to adjust midstream, how to monitor, how to make sure we're ensuring that we are 100% depleted at the end of the year, and how to make those mid-course kind of corrections. It's very overwhelming sometimes. When I first started, very time-consuming. It's a task for me when I'm working with fiscal documents or I'm tracking. I need to give that 100% focus. Once you have your system in place and you understand what you're checking, what you're looking for, it's going to be a little easier, hopefully, each month. So when I first started, I realized I was spending way too much time and energy on trying to develop my system and less on what was a true, accurate time that should have been dedicated towards our fiscal responsibility. So that's another reason to reach out to your institution, maybe to have some other staff in other areas that can assist and take some of the minor details off your plate. A lot of planning ahead is very beneficial in eliminating some of the more time and focus sensitive tasks. I'll go through and be happy to share my checklist that I use for fiscal planning and monitoring. Annually, I establish an overall spreadsheet that's going to allow my staff and I to get together to predict everything we think we might need for the year. And that includes a wish list of unlimited funds. So we basically get together and work on a list that if we had all the money in the world, we would be able to purchase these other items as well. The first thing we do is allocate our payroll, outline our full-time staff salaries, make sure that you include any possible increases, such as your cost of living adjustment. Our institution gives those out in September, which makes it more challenging for us to start July, August with one pay for our full-time staff. And then if we have a cost of living adjustment added in September, we have to adjust our full-time salaries for the rest of the year based on that. Definitely you've got planned and you've got unexpected costs predicted for aides, test proctors, part-time instructors. This year with the new test, the TABE 1112 implemented in January, we expected a certain amount of proctors and we designated additional funds. We did not expect the number of proctors that we would need, though. Make sure that you're calculating your fringe pay. We do have certain TRS contributions that come into play, Medicare, Medicaid, all the Social Security, everything that you might need to be able to pay on your own side if your contract is allowing you to pay for those fringe costs. And I am going to try to switch over a little bit and share my screen so I can show you guys a little bit of what we do with the projections. So we start out with a calculated estimate of each of our salaries. We do have both administrative broke out as well as the fringe and the different payrolls. And then we just basically come up with estimates for maybe conference travel. What do we anticipate our staff mileage? We have our distance learning seats that will be renewed.
Tiffany,
Yes.
are you sharing your screen?
Yes, I am.
Because we see the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Thank you for telling me that. I was wondering. I thought about pausing and asking. Okay, is that good?
No.
No? Okay. How about
There.
that? Okay.
There you go. So
Sorry.
start over.
Okay.
Everybody.
Thank you. So we are allocating for administrative staff. We also, like I said, the program, we break it down by person. These are my full-time staff versus the part-time staff. We do include our aides all together in the year. Instructors, we throw everything we can in there. We hope we can afford enough PD stipends, and it's funny because I'll talk about not using the word stipends later. Fringe definitely costs quite a bit. You want to predict any of your regular monthly travel. If you have trainings, if you go out, our test proctors that have to go out to our rural sites. You want to predict any of your contracts, such as your copier rental, distance learning seats, testing supplies, your training costs, your indirect costs. Ideally, you want this to be at zero. This was one of our first practices, by the way, so you see that I had a penny left. So that was better than being over a penny. We not only do an annual projection, and this goes through several revisions, we break this down into monthly, what it would cost. Essentially, hopefully your full-time staff salaries would be the same. You want to predict how your part-time salaries may fluctuate. Obviously, we do not anticipate July being a higher paid month for our off-campus sites are not up and running yet, versus your August salaries, which would increase. You've got your predicted annual professional development. We do a large one in August. We do another large one in January. And we go to the annual TALE conference, so I know I can budget that in. We try to anticipate which months may be higher on travel, whether it's for increase on progress testing months. You should know your program activities directly affect what your cost allocations are going to be. So you need to have the people that are going to be setting up your classes, the people that are going to be working firsthand with the students in the meeting where you're working on your budget. You definitely don't want to try to anticipate what their costs are without having them play a key role in predicting. I know that once you go through the process with some annual strategic fiscal planning, it's a lot easier each year after that because you're able to say, last year we spent X on supplies. Do you guys foresee us needing more or less? And how's that going to play out? You need to make sure that your IET courses, that you have a ballpark of tuition and make sure that you have enough tuition already allocated or support service costs per student that you have in relationship to your targets. We have a copier rental. That's our only contractual service. So we're able to allocate those at a nice set rate each month. Same with our indirect costs that are pulled. And then that's our annual projection sheet that we want to make sure that we include anything and then break it down into a monthly, quarterly estimate of the expenses that we're able to look for. Definitely the TWC documentation and the paperwork that we're going to have to submit are actually monthly costs. Okay, I think that was the only spreadsheet as far as that goes with the predictions that we do use. And one little note, a side note about performance funds. So I do not include any performance funds in my predictions. I keep those completely separate just in case. And that way, once I know that they're secured, we can always add those funds in for some of those specific costs that you may not be able to afford in your regular budget. Something like new books, new textbooks, updating technology, that kind of thing. So we definitely want to not deplete those funds and then turn around and not ensure that we're going to receive them. That's always a scary thing. So with your annual projection secure, you can break this down on your quarterly and keep an eye on whether your funds may need to be moved from maybe one line item to another. And although those of you who report fiscally to CEDAR and to TWC, CEDAR combines all your specific line items together this year when you're reporting, which is great for giving us a good sense of flexibility. It's also a lot easier to keep them separate in your own spreadsheets, though, because it allows you to monitor more closely and be able to kind of adjust your own funds if you need to, so that you don't accidentally overspend unexpectedly. So the prediction and staying on track and monthly monitoring and quarterly monitoring is definitely something that is worth its time as you develop your own system. This is our prediction sheet, but I want to show you monthly. There's a couple of different spreadsheets, and you'll see that I definitely love spreadsheets. There's a couple of different spreadsheets that I want to show you. One is if you're a very, let's see, I'm a simple person. So when I'm working on my budget, this is basically what mine looks like. It looks like a checkbook register. So I have my cost over on the left, just like a checkbook register. This gave me a very comforting feeling. So each time I spend something, and yes, I know I'm a small program, each time I spend something, I'm going to put it on here, and I'm going to show what funding source it came from, and I'm going to be able to look for that at the end of the month, and I'm going to be able to report when it was actually posted in our college system, and it's going to make me feel nice and warm and fuzzy because I'm a simple person without an accounting degree. So when I set up my little register, and that's exactly what I call it, the checkbook register. Our grants accountant actually sat down and looked at it and said, "Well, that's a good primitive effort." It was my first attempt at trying to stay with her on the same numbers. So that gives me a way to cross-check. And in the bigger picture, this is actually what we call the master tracker. Now, she maintains one of the spreadsheets, I maintain the other, so that we can reconcile monthly and ensure we're on the same page and there's no huge discrepancies. So monthly, I'm able to, if you notice, this is all February. So we have our actual expenditures of what was put into this payroll line, and it's broke down by different funding streams. We have a cumulative, we have the actual balance, and we have some adjustments sometimes that do need to be made. Now, these are not necessarily adjustments that are made through the Workforce Commission because these are an internal monitoring. You've got a few other categories. So maybe I overspent by $2 in books, and I'll take it out of the marketing budget. But it's a good way for us to stay on the same page over what we spend monthly, where we're anticipating going over, under, and what we need to do to monitor and make sure we can get some adjustments made in CEDAR if we need to ahead of time. So your monthly reports should actually, whatever system you come up with, they should allow you to review your payroll costs in details and make sure that you can label each of your expenses. So this gives us a good idea of how we monitor, but that's your overall expenses. Another thing that we make sure is that we're a Banner school, so our fiscal reports that come out of Banner definitely do not look this nice and simplistic. There's goobly-goo everywhere and lots of different codes and lots of different transactions and a lot of accounting terminology. So I worked with our with our Banner trained employees here on campus and was able to have them help me create a report that's going to dump into a spreadsheet that's easy for me to manage and read. So I can review monthly each cost, what it was. I can review what fund it was posted to, what the amount was, and this is my own system of designating whether it was service area travel, training travel, and I can designate exactly what it might have been used for. So at the end of the year, whenever I'm running my different pivot tables and reviewing my costs, I'm able to run reports from my spreadsheets that will be able to tell me this is how much you spent on training travel, this is how much you actually spent on different office costs. And so that's very helpful with planning the next year, but also for me to be able to see in a simpler manner what may have been posted incorrectly, and maybe be able to let me use my checkbook register to see if a cost hasn't been posted. Because if there's an error, whether it's a posting that should be there or a posting that's not, you want to get that corrected as soon as possible. That can definitely lead to trouble, not just as I said, maybe possibly if something's going on, you want to make sure that you get it corrected because it's transparent. But also on the same token, I've had trouble in the past because my fiscal agent does not operate the same fiscal year I am. So one of my costs were actually posted to another department, and it wasn't discovered until late July, early August, when the college was reviewing their end of year, and my grant year had already closed. So you definitely want to keep a close eye on correcting any of your fiscal postings that may or may not have happened in the correct year, and get those done as quickly as possible so your reporting is very true. Now, I'm going to go back to, I think, okay, there we go. I'm going to go back to show you guys a little bit more. Does anyone have any questions that maybe we can chat about before we get into documentation? Nope, Dr. Escamilla?
I don't see any. I've been asking. If
Good.
anybody has any questions, please do type them in the chat box and we'll
Good. I know I may be
definitely know.
going a little fast, and that's definitely I'm trying to scratch the surface and make sure that we kind of maybe bring up some topics and hopefully won't overwhelm anyone. So, and maybe it's again very surface level. I'm trying to give you guys a good overview of what we're looking for. Because the next component of your fiscal management, to me, clearly my number one responsibility is going to be documentation. That's not only the most common, but it's also probably the scariest process of fiscal monitoring, because this is what is subject to this is what you need in hand for an audit. Although the auditors are there to help make sure that you're following your processes and maintaining your integrity, it's very scary to go through that process, especially for a non-fiscal person such as myself. We have both internal monitoring requirements here on our campus. We have a state agency monitor, and we have an external monitor for our institution. So if you're like me and you're running a program day to day, you might have trouble switching gears to focus on your fiscal charges. You might not remember off the top of your head what the justification was for the process, why you purchased this, why you used this funding. And paper documentation may seem a very time-consuming, daunting task, but it's definitely a lifesaver when you are going through your auditing visits or anyone asks for documentation of anything. So I'm going to share with you some of the paper documentation. Ironically, everything we have digital is also backed up with paper, and it gives us kind of a two-check system again. So I'm going to try to share my screen again. Okay, let's see. There we go. So the first thing we'll talk about is payroll being documented. We do document monthly with a written time and effort report. The full-time staff record their hours in each funding source, and those percentages are used in our monthly payroll allocation. And I'll show you how we do this. So we do have one account, one fund on the campus that is not ours. We use that to bill all of our payroll initially. We just started doing this about a year and a half, 2 years ago. This was a source of contention that was very frustrating for everyone involved. It took a lot of convincing to get our institution to give us one account that we can bill our payroll to, and then we can reallocate out of that account. Now, the way this works is usually by the 10th of every month, all our payroll is ran. By the 12th, I have allocations in the payroll coordinator's hands, and by the 15th, that account is back to zero. It's a big trust issue. I feel very, very responsible. It was a huge step to be able to allow us to do that. If you don't have a separate non-grant funded account to use in this purpose, you may want to have a conversation with me later, and I can kind of share with you about how we had approached the institution and got that taken care of. It just makes things a lot easier when you're actually allocating based on true costs. So this is actually mine, and this just is a smidge of the different funding streams my payroll comes from. So each month we have it set up to automatically populate if each day of the month, 1 to 31. So if on the 5th of January I worked all day in the correctional program, I'm going to put my 8 hours there, and it's going to designate, or it's going to automatically calculate the percentage that I spent. And as you'll see, and I'll just throw some numbers in, it's just tied together on the spreadsheet to be able to break down my costs, my cost objectives. So some people are very specific about their costs, down to the minute. We've had people very clear about it, and then overall, it's basically looking at your calendar each day and deciding where your efforts were spent for that day. So then, at the end of the month, when I set up our payroll allocation sheet, I will put in whatever the salary is, and here's where I'll report our efforts. So this effort sheet ties directly back to what my percentage was. So if that makes any sense, let me see what one of them might have been. That's one of the samples of our part-time instructors. So if I have 36% of my pay goes to the correction program, I'm going to put that there, and it would allocate whatever the pay was here. So I'll import each of our salaries and each of the fringe each month from our monthly payroll report, what was actually paid out. I'll import that, dump it in. I'll go through and allocate each of our efforts. Maybe you have someone that's usually 100% towards, well, I don't want to say Fed program. Let's say we have an ATX program. She's 100% there. And this kind of gives you a little color coding system just to double check to make sure everyone reaches their 100% designation. And it also gives your payroll allocations or your payroll coordinator a nice clean split. That way you're not going back constantly reallocating. You're only doing this once. I have employees that are paid once a month. I have employees paid twice a month. And then I have our part-time instructors. So just to show you, I kind of left this with the salary of our part-time instructors, their wages, their fringe, how I would break across their payroll, and then I want to show you how it ties to our summary page. We'll break down what the balance may have been initially at the beginning of the month. It gives me, for each of the projects that we've taken care of based on their time and effort report, how much will be depleted in payroll and how much will be left in payroll at the end. So I know I'm going through that a little quickly. Again, it's setting up a way to cross-check and allocate your payrolls so that you know exactly how much that's going to cost each of your funds, as well as, and I'm going to share this one last spreadsheet with you, as well as the percentage breakdown from your time and effort reports for your part-time salary. Now, our full-time is based on their reporting how much time and effort they've put in to each of the projects and the cost objectives. But if you notice, our part-timers are broke across by how many hours their students are in class. So at the end of the month, we have our data entry, run a report of the number of hours that the students were in by funding stream. So I may have an instructor, for example, who only teaches this NIDE ESL class. The number of students that were in there only were funded with basic AFLA. That's the total cost, or the total number of hours that the students were in. So this funding is based on an 88-12 split. Now the reason I use 12% on state here is because I get 12% of my total funds basically are state. That's the total of the overall costs. But if you'll notice, I have, for example, let me find one here that'll show you a little bit different. maybe our TANF. This is the class she taught. That's how many basic AFLA hours were in her class. That's how many TANF hours students accumulated in her class. So that's her breakdown. So we would go over and insert those into the payroll allocations chart, and that's the breakdown that would generate to have her payroll taken care of each month to make it as true as possible. In addition, I've got 3 different pieces of paper showing our methodology of how we allocated that teacher's salary after data was already posted, so we could go back and say 7% of the hours she instructed can be allocated towards TANF because that's how many student hours were accumulated in her class. So, I know it may sound a little over ambitious, and it may sound more complicated than I'm trying to make it. It's a simple process using my data entry clerk to kind of help pull those percentages, makes things a lot easier. We have the paper documentation each month from the instructors as well, what they have that they put into different programs. They report their hours that they instructed, so it shows us how we can allocate 100% of their salary out.
Tiffany, there's a question.
Yes. Good.
If it says, when you say hours, is that contact hours?
These are student contact hours. And I know some programs actually do, I use student hours. A couple of years ago, I was using the number of students in class. If I had 3 TANF students in a class of 10, I would fund them 30% TANF. And I believe Nicole Stevens from Howard College might have been, or maybe Johnine and Tarrant. One of them had shared that they were using instructional hours because even though you may have 3 students, what if they never showed? So I thought it would be a truer report if we could pull the actual student hours. And it's easy to do since Teams can give you that participant count by funding source. So I know this teacher teaches this class. This is how many hours she had TANF funded. This is how many hours the students accumulated in BASIC or AFLA. Does that make sense? Okay.
Janet says correct. That is what we use.
Oh, good.
Great.
Okay, so a couple of other things. I want to run through a few more little resources that may be helpful. That's pretty much our documentation on travel. But one thing I'm most proud of, and I've got to give credit to our grants accountant director, although at first everyone was very reluctant to use it, it's been a nice lifesaver, the procurement record that we have. It's 17 pages. That is not a mistake. But it will tell you everything you want to know and walk you through the process of purchases, whether they're just a micro purchase, whether they're competitive, whether they're a bid. It asks you to make sure that you've read and confirm that you read all the principles of procurement. It asks you about the disposal for purchases of supplies and equipment. And one fantastic thing, it includes not only our local policies, but also the grant specifics. So she makes sure that all of your procurement costs, your thresholds, what's considered a micro purchase, what's not, is included on our procurement record. And we are not allowed to purchase anything without having that procurement record in hand. And it's a great way for us to document and make sure we remember what's actually taking place and what's not. Our travel is very similar, and I think I've got the travel is very similar. It has specific grant requirements that are outlined on there. Let me grab that real quick. I'll be happy to pull that up. I didn't have it right here. Okay. But I was going to share one more thing is our training agreement. This is our documentation that we have, although it's kind of humorous. It's between us and our fiscal agent. But it clearly designates that this is the student that we're paying the training costs for, that's going along into this course. This is where it is and what what date it's starting. So again, the process is every type of purchase you make, every penny you spend has a paper attached, so that whatever you're buying is actually documenting why you chose those costs, that it was reasonable and allocable, and also that you're able to support and finish out those costs to make sure that you have a reason and a rationale for them. Okay? So I am going to move on. And again, any of our materials and any of our tools, you'll see at the end my information that I'll be happy to share with. Some of the tricky areas, I agree, is blending and braiding costs. Although there are some true costs that you could incur, they also should be very rare. So if you're purchasing items or you have staff that works with multiple populations, you want to be able to use those multiple funding streams to be able to support that cost. Stipends are another area that definitely can cause some difficulties. Calling them stipends, calling them bonuses, it's the terminology that you want to be careful with. We definitely have timesheets now for our training versus stipends. Account depletions, definitely you want to document those in detail with your grant documentation. Although your funds can be used, for example, federal dollars can be used, you want to record why you chose to spend those specific funds and not other options. And lastly, tuition costs are very clean usually to report, but with large student populations, you definitely want to double check your student accounts to ensure that there's no additional fees charged to the students and make sure that the posting has been made correctly. We've had a lot of trouble in the past with that, or sometimes our students actually have a balance before we make a payment. So you want to confirm that your data is going to match your allocations with the student's instructions. Tools and resources, spreadsheets are your best friend. Some of mine are a little more complex. Definitely you can keep them simple. Some of them are very simple. Be careful when you're tying them together. I remember my grant compliance director reviewed my spreadsheets a few years ago and said I had managed to weave a spider web of confusion that she would never be able to untangle, so we started fresh. I've shared several of mine, what they look like, but I'd be more than willing if you want to reach out to me to help you develop your own, or reach out to someone on our campus that could help. I know we're all individual programs, so we can't say one size is going to fit all. And make sure you're familiar with your fiscal reports. Your institution can share those, or your fiscal agent can share those with you. Whether it's Banner or another system, you definitely can ask your fiscal agent to provide whatever reports you need. Don't be afraid to ask. They're very appreciative that you're taking that initiative. CEDAR reports can help with the monthly cross-check, but also there's a lag in reporting sometimes. So be careful. Don't panic that your numbers won't exactly match their numbers every month. And finally, friends can be very helpful. I've met several in other programs who were willing to help me out. And certainly if I can help any of you out, or we can share information, that's definitely a key. And we're all a statewide team working towards the same adult education goals, so please feel free to share your thoughts, any questions, maybe some suggestions or expertise areas you guys would like to share. And if we don't have the answer, we definitely can find it for you. So thank you so much for this hour that you've given me. And if you have any other questions or any comments, I'll be happy to see if I can help any more.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. A lot of great information all at one time, but thank you for sharing. We had some great comments here. It says very informative and useful funding management information. Thank you, and have a great Easter weekend. Thank you, Mauro. And again, thank you for the training from Mauricio. Great job, Tiffany. And thanks. No questions. Great job. Love what you shared. So, again, Tiffany is available at tiffany.johnson@victoriacollege.edu. And Tiffany, thank you again for being willing to share this information. We always appreciate any information we can get to help us run our programs more smoothly. So thank you all for attending, and thank you, Tiffany.